Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guest today is Ravi Sahota. Now, Ravi, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Hey, Andy, Daphne, so good to meet you. I'm really excited to be sharing this time with you. So I'm Ravi Sahota. I live in Birmingham. Originally, my family from North India, from Punjab, and I'm a business consultant. So I work with either businesses or charities or Christian organizations, helping them mainly with strategic things, leadership, helping raise finance, the normal sort of business consultancy work.
Yeah, now that's how I got connected with you. We've been involved with some consultancy together, which has been really fun. Great to see how you do things. For people listening that need that kind of stuff, I highly recommend you check out Ravi and get him on board. He's phenomenal. So for people that want to find out more, where can they do that?
You can just check me out on LinkedIn. I'll send you the profile and then people can have a look, and that explains a little bit about my history and who I currently work for. And so people connect through that.
Yeah, and I will put that link in the description box. So for people listening that want to find out more, go to the description box, hit the link, and it will be there for you.
I'm very pleased to meet you. I've heard a lot about you now. I think another podcast idea while we're listening would be to connect consultancy and ministry, because I think those are very often completely disconnected, and you see a lot of chaos in ministry which you wouldn't see in the business world. So maybe we can do another one. However,
and how people in the business world, when they get involved with ministry,
right,
lose all their business sense, and that descends into chaos as well, when really you want them to bring their business sense over.
So we started talking about this. I've set us in a different direction, but we'll plan number 2 with you.
Okay. But
first of all, before we have another one where we talk about what you do, can you tell us a bit, going back however long you would like to go to, as to how you came to be in the place that you are now? Because from what I hear, it's been quite an adventure.
I'd love to. So unfortunately, I have to start with my granddad. So it takes a few minutes to get through the history. But we came from a very poor family in India, low caste community in northern India, in Punjab. And so literally grandparents lived in a mud hut and struggling for basics like food, etc. My granddad became a sort of migrant worker, and at that point went to Burma. And the idea being that you'd send money back, start, trying to build something. And then he got caught up in the World War, and the Japanese were in Burma, and he ended up in a prison camp there. And he's got some horrific stories he told us before he died. He lived till about 100, but I'll get to him in a second. So anyway, 3 of them escaped the prison camp and into the jungle. And 2 of the other people that were with him died in the jungle. And he was rescued by the Indian Army and just really hours away from dying. And so he went back to India. And then under the voucher scheme, the British were inviting people from the Commonwealth to come and rebuild the country back in the UK. And so my granddad came under the voucher scheme from India to the UK. It was one of the early people in the sort of 50s, in the mid 50s that came. And so they left. So he left again as a migrant worker with a view that, they'd send money back to India, etc. And when he came here, it was the normal migrant life, 15 people living in a 3-bedroom terraced, and, they all work shifts. So when one went to work, the other one used the bed, and they all cooked in one pot, that sort of community that they tried to connect to with a view of going back. So none of those migrant workers ever believed that the UK would be their home. But, you bought a lot of rupees with a pound. And so they tried to stay to send money back. And then what he did, my granddad, he invited my dad over and to say, come and help for a little while. We'll work here for a few years, send the money back, buy land, we'll have a farm, and that's how life will be. But by then, my dad had got married, and my mum, and they'd had my eldest sister, who was 1. And so when my dad was here for about six months, he really missed her. So he invited her over, so she came. And so my dad's background was really, so my history was on my mum's side, they were Hindu, and on my dad's side, and granddad's side, they were Sikh. But my dad was like a really radical guy. To try and escape poverty in India, he turned to communism as the way of, so when he came here, he was a sort of quite, a Marxist in a way in his thinking. And so he used some of that Marxism to set up things like Indian Workers Association here and try and fight for the rights, because at that time the rights of migrant workers were very poor, health and safety, etc. And so it was quite abusive. So he sort of got involved in that. So he was a journalist in India, and so and then they started inviting more of the family over, and funnily enough, my mum didn't understand contraceptives, so they didn't have a view of that. And suddenly there were 7 of us, and year after year. So, and then they recognised that education was free here and healthcare was free here. So they thought, what we'll do is we'll wait until the kids get some basic education and the healthcare, then we'll go back. But the view was still to go back. But then we grew up. I was born in the UK, so we all grew up with. Sort of a mixed identity of being Indian and, obviously brought up in the UK. And so then that sort of resulted eventually in us staying. And then my dad died. We did the normal thing, like, they tried to escape poverty by buying shops. So we had our corner shop, like most Indian people, as a way of trying to escape the poverty. But my dad died when he was 38 from suddenly with a heart attack. Never really thought that. And so being the eldest son, 2 older sisters, and then the youngest is a brother, and then 3 other sisters. So suddenly I felt this deep sense of responsibility. I was 12 years old at the time. A deep sense of responsibility for, providing for my grandparents, for looking after my mom, doing arranged marriages for my sisters, and my first real supernatural. And at that time, I was, between being a Marxist or being a Sikh, so I wasn't really sure about, whether there was a God. But just before, we had a shop and a house, and I was at the house the night that my dad died, and that was my first real supernatural experience, where I heard a voice saying, "Your dad is about to die. Don't worry, I'm with you." And I thought, that's a bit weird. I've virtually heard this audible voice. The phone rang, and it was my mom. She's saying, "No, you need to come back. You need to get here quick. Your dad's not well." And I said, "He's died, hasn't he?" And she put the phone down. And then for the next few years, as I never really felt, so I knew I had these 3 responsibilities: look after my grandparents and bury them at the right time, look after my mom and give arranged marriages to my brothers and sisters. And I knew that's what my world was going to be. And it was a bit weird because we had the shop. So the shop was like most Indian shops. We'd open at 6 a.m. as a newsagent and close at 10 p.m. as an off license. So one of my uncles would pick me up at 5 a.m. to go to the fruit and veg market, and then we'd come back, do all that, and then off to school, and then I'd have a few £1,000s in my pocket because another uncle was going to come and pick me up to do the other wholesale shopping, and so life was just different and not difficult at the time because we sort of, as a family, we were quite close, but I felt this deep sense of responsibility. And then my youngest sister, who was 14 at that time, so I was about 20-ish, she became a Christian. She went to a Billy Graham concert with one of the pastor's children. And when she came back, she said it was a Christian, but I thought, well, what does that mean? I hated the idea of Christianity, to be honest. I thought it was a very negative thing. But I thought, one day she's going to have an arranged marriage. She's not going to be a part of this family. Whenever she goes, she goes. And so this is not going to be my problem. This will be the problem of her husband and that she wants to be a Christian. But then she started witnessing to the youngest family member, which was my brother. And then he became a Christian. And so then they had this 2 years of nightmare in our house because they would be praying, they'd go upstairs speaking a funny language, they'd be saying all this stuff to us, you're going to go to hell and all, and it was really intense. And after a while I thought, this is going to split my family up. I'm 20 years old, I got responsibility for them, and I was quite aggressive, violent, even once or twice to them, trying to knock this Christianity out of them, thinking this is not for us. And then one day it occurred to me that it wasn't their fault, that they were being brainwashed by some cult leader. And I really needed to get to him, not to them, because why was I punishing them? They're just kids. They didn't know what's going on. So I did this thought, I'll go to church with them. And so I told them, hey, listen, I want to become a Christian. And so they're like, oh, really? And so 20 something now. And so we walked to church, which was about 20 minutes. And I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the pastor. I'm going to get him to tell them that Christianity is nothing. And then that way we'll sort this out. So I got there, it was a school hall. So I thought, clearly this isn't even a church, something's wrong here. And some rock band is playing. And I thought, this is exactly what I thought it would be, some sort of cult experience that they're going to be going through. And so walking, but I was surprised because quite a few people were laughing and smiling, and I didn't think there was about 30, 40 people there. And so I got this stage with this rock band on, and I thought I'll stand towards the front. Obviously, the vicar's going to come out at some point. When he comes out, then I'll get him. And so I'm standing there, and the music's playing. Then all of a sudden, this torso shape appears in front of me. And I'm thinking, what's this? I'm closing my eyes to make it go away, open my eyes to make it go away, and this torso won't disappear. And I'm thinking, how are they hallucinating me? What have they done? Because I haven't drunk anything, so there must be something weird here, because I can't not make this thing go away. Then this thing puts its hand in its side, and on its hand is blood and water. And it takes this blood and water and it puts it from the top of my head into the middle of my chest. And then all of a sudden, this guy walks onto the platform, jeans and leather jacket, long hair. And he turns around and says, Jesus was pierced through his side, and out of his side came blood and water, and that's how we're saved. And I thought, this is just too weird. How does he know that's just happened to me? What are they doing here? This is just too. But then I knew that there was a God. I didn't know whether it was Hindu God, Sikh God, Christian God, good God, bad God. Because in Hinduism, you worship the evil gods that don't get you, and you worship the good gods because they bless you. So I had no frame for thinking, what's this that's happening to me? Then he talked, and the music stopped, and I thought, oh, this is just too weird. I can't get him yet. I'll have to wait a bit. And then everyone sits down, and then he talked for 2 hours on something called Og of Bashan, and I had no idea what he was talking about. But my body
That's a long sermon.
It was a long sermon. So I started shaking and feeling hot sweats, and I'm thinking everybody stands back up. And now that I know there's a God, I'm thinking I've got to find out what type of God this is. So I thought I'll ask him a question. So my question was, are you for the poor? Because if I can see you like this, clearly you'll be able to talk to me. Are you for the poor? Because if he's for the poor, he's probably on the good side. And if he's against the poor, he's probably on the bad side. No answer. This music's playing. I'm getting more and more sort of this conviction is hitting me, and I don't know what's going on. And then I have this question, am I going to believe or not going to believe in this God that I know nothing of? And eventually it got too intense, and I just thought, I can't now not believe. So I said in my heart, I believe. Whoever you are, I believe in you. And at that moment, everything just slowed down for me. And then I knew that Jesus was God. I knew the Bible was the word of God. And just instinctively, I knew every word that came out of my mouth would come to pass. And I knew if I touched somebody and they were sick, they would get healed. All this stuff just like all of a sudden got deposited in me. And then I cried with my brother and sister, just thinking, oh my goodness me, I've punished you all this time, and you really had something, which was the truth. And then I heard a voice saying to me, you need to fall out with your girlfriend. Clear as day. Not like hello and welcome to the kingdom or anything like that, So, but or I've forgiven you of your sin. You got to follow. So Sunita was really important to me because she'd helped me. So I'd known her for about 4 years or something, and she'd helped me through the rocky bit of not having my dad around and the emotion. And she was the first person really. So she'd seen me through a lot of the pain, and so I thought, okay, Lord, if that's what you want, that's what I'll do. They tried to talk to me, and they tried to give me a Bible. I said, look, I'm not going to talk to anyone. I've just met with God. I don't want to talk to anyone. So I went home with my brother and sister, and they said, yeah, just relax, don't worry. So I rang Sunita, and she came, And then I thought, with a brother in the car, and I thought, she's going to kill me because she's going to think 4 years and you're just going to end it now by just saying, And she looked at me and she goes, what I can see in your face and eyes, I'd never be able to take away from you. And she goes, I know you found God. And how do you know? And then, so we just left. I thought, great, so that bit's over. And then a journey started. And I had to fast track things. Then over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, pretty much everyone in my family, all my brothers and sisters, my cousins, aunties, uncles, parents, they all had supernatural visitations from God, and they all became Christians. And they'll all have their own stories about what their experiences were. So we were then now in the middle of a revival. So now we used to go to church 4 or 5 times a week. And there'll be hours, the services, but every service there'd be miraculous events occurring, literally people walking out of wheelchairs, blind eyes opening. And so this church over the next 3 years grew to about 800 people. So I got fast tracked into the leadership of that church. So I became a trustee, but it was 4 of us that were the 3 that were already there, and I became one of the leaders of that church. And we then had people from all over the world, the Benny Hinns and all the people of the world, the Christian ministries were coming because they wanted to see what God was doing. And it was an exciting time. But Sunita, 3 months, when her parents found out that I'd become a Christian, they were absolutely against it. They threatened us. They came to my house. They threatened my mom, her brothers did, and it became very messy to the point where we had to call the police to take an injunction out against them. But they locked her in a room for about a month. They burnt all her Bibles. She managed to rip 1 page out and lived off that 1 page because she also had a supernatural experience and become a Christian, and she'd told them, and they completely lost it with her. And then the police pulled her out of there. So then I didn't want to get back to her because I thought God had said to me, don't, to leave her. But eventually I felt the Lord say, no, you can have her back. And so she'd become a Christian. Then we got married. So we've been married 30 years this year.
Wow.
And so then the church started to grow substantially. We started to see supernatural. So to the point where in our house, all my brothers and sisters, my cousins, we used to go to do college or work or wherever we were doing at that time. We'd fast during the day, we'd all meet together, we'd all eat together, and literally angels would appear in the room. And so people from the church started to come because they just wanted to see the angels. And then the church leaders actually shut it down, saying, look, you're too inexperienced, too mature, you don't know how to handle this. So, and that was a bit of a shock to me. I thought this was all good stuff. And that's sort of my first experience of religion started to kick in, that religion needs to control things. And so just as that, and there's a whole church story, but just as that church grew to 800 people in 3 years, in the next couple of years, we managed to bring it back down to about 150 people. Now, all those people that left all had great relationships with God, but we had no idea of pastoring or fivefold ministry gifts or anything. What we believed is that if you had a marriage problem, you walked out to the front. Someone blew over you and your marriage problems went away. Or if you had a financial issue, you came to the front and someone laid hands on. Because it was that season. Remember in the 80s when this was it all happened at the front of the altar. And there was no real other gifts that were operating at the time. So I learned how to do church badly for 10 years. How it grows, so there's we can do another thing on that about how churches grow and what the challenges are and what, so I learned a lot about that. I've talked non-stop.
No, it's really good.
I just was thinking at some point, we need to press pause and say to ourselves, this is happening in the UK, in the West, because you can listen to your story and we could be listening to someone in India or in the East. I mean, and I think for anybody who's listening who's in the West, we need to remind ourselves this is happening in our own nations.
It is possible that it can happen here. Yeah.
That people like yourself who come to this country, who have backgrounds in other religions, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Hindu, whether it's Sikh, or whoever it is, there are people in our nations increasingly today who will have almost like their Eastern way of coming to Jesus. I mean, visions and gods and all of that is so much so much more Eastern than it is Western.
Yeah, the thought of encountering a supernatural is a
Yeah.
much more, in the East, they're much more open to these kinds of
Yeah.
engagements. In the West, it's like, well, what kind of magic is this that we're doing? You know, what
Yeah.
kind of, you know, that we're not quite so open to that kind of the spiritual realm, I guess.
And so when we meet people who are like you were, it is challenging me to see this differently. You know, it's not a matter I've got to stand on the street and give you the 5-minute presentation on the gospel. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but to expect more. I mean, we are hearing more and more about, we personally, of Muslims who are having encounters with Jesus. I mean, this is Ramadan. And, you know, they are looking for encounters and for dreams and for visions. And I think it's a time we have to pray, yes, send them dreams and visions of yourself. So I find it deeply challenging to hear your story as a challenge to our own mindsets. Have I got it right?
Yeah, you have. Yeah. So I think for me, it's a story of Christ, isn't it? It's a Jesus story. When the presence of God comes into a geography, you know, I don't like the word revival, to be honest, but, you know, because it has connotations of lots of different things. But this idea that in a certain time, in a certain season, God does things. And when you've experienced that type of atmosphere, let's say, you'll never forget it. And you can't, two of my sisters had been diagnosed that they could never have children. And in that time, one prayer, they both got kids. And so, you know, that was a time and a season. And I remember in that season, what we used to do was make a list of all the things that we wanted, jobs and relationships and whatever. And the next day we were fully expected that every one of those things would be answered, you know, and then we'd make the next day's list. We just thought that that's how Christianity was. But that now, after 30 years of Christianity, I recognize that was a time and a season. So it's not something, I don't crave that, because I saw that the impact of miracles and the supernatural, I saw it both have a positive and a negative effect on people's lives. I saw healings that were really supernatural that afterwards, after a number of years, those people completely forgot about those healings and not walking with God. So other people that didn't get healed, that have got desperate relationships with God. So I saw that signs and wonders in itself is not the gospel. It's one element of the gospel.
So can I just throw something in there? You know, we were told by Jesus to go and make disciples, right? That's what we were told to do. Could it be that it wasn't so much a reflection on the signs and the wonders, as it were, but the fact that people weren't being discipled? Because if you're being discipled with it, if you were being pastored, but I like the word disciple more, the chances of that happening would have been far less.
And that's exactly right, Daphne. So if you said to me, what is the challenge in today? And the thing with discipleship, it's not a quick fix. No. So it's the way I see it is there's a percentage of people that have supernatural. So, you know, one of my sisters used to smoke. She prayed, the next day it disappeared. She just had no desire to do it. My cousin, he smoked. He had same prayer and struggled with it for 10 years. And so there's different, it's not like one answer for everybody all of the time. And this is the challenge with discipleship, that you have to walk with the people over a period of time, and they have to. And so for me, the heart of discipleship is not doctrine, it's observing someone's life and following them through their journey, not just of success, but also of their pain and failings. So,
exactly.
And what I find is that it's very difficult for people with a Western mindset to follow someone else, because this whole freedom that we've fought for independence makes it really challenging for us to say, actually, I want to be like that person, because that seemed as weakness. Whereas in the cultures that I come from, following people is like the norm. You think, I actually want to be like that person, is a very positive thing. And so I think the challenge isn't so much that we haven't got people who want to be discipled. I think a shortage of people who want to say, I want to live the life worthy that people would say, I want to follow you. Because that is the big challenge. It's not that people want, they have to see something that they say, actually, I want to be like her. I want to be like him. I want a marriage like their marriage. I want children like their children. I want to have a call and a passion like that person. And we don't have these people around. They're not, there are many teachers, few fathers.
Exactly.
Fathers and mothers who really disciple. And that is a life that's worth living for the benefit of others. Isn't an easy mindset for a Western, for a Western person who's always thinking about their ministry and their life and their happiness and their rights and their privileges. You have to put all those down if you want to be the type of person that's going to disciple other people.
I want to go back to your sister and brother when they got saved, and again in the East. The idea of giving your life to Christ and there being a price, a cost for doing that is a very normal mindset. It's understood, generally speaking. In the West, not so much. And the price that they paid was right at home. The cost was the attacks were all coming at home. Maybe not all of them. There may be others, but you talked about even being violent and all that kind of stuff. How? And I guess at the time they would have been fairly new to the faith. How did they walk through that, the attacks at home, and how did they handle it? And also, in the way they handled it, what kind of impact did that have on you?
And how old were they at the time?
So my sister was about 15 and my brother was 14.
Right.
So you should get them on. You can ask them, yeah,
we will.
About how they felt and whatever their experiences. But so they handled it. During that period where I hadn't got saved, it was really tough for them because it was school, so they were getting persecuted from every side, from religion, was just not perceived positive, but in the family, the courage to be able to stand up to me would have been a big thing for them and to my mom. But you got to understand that my mom would be banging her head against the bathroom wall, saying to them, you can't be a Christian. You can't be a Christian. The level of blackness, it's just not the violence. It was the whole sense of hatred that was going on towards their faith. And in Indian communities, the honor and all of this, like now I see it as all a counterfeit of things which are, are biblical, but there was a sense that you just can't do this. So it must have been horrendous. It was horrendous for them. The dad had died. They were struggling with things, when they were quite young. They got me as their role model, and then now I'm being, and I'd given them as much love and freedom as I thought I could. And now all of a sudden I put the brakes on. And of the most important thing to them. So it must have been, a horrendous time for them. But they didn't stop, and they would be crying. When it was a terraced house. I mean, when they prayed. There was no holding back. They'd be shouting and, speaking in tongues, and everyone used to be like, what has gone wrong with them? No one prays like this. What on earth is, this is clearly something's not right. There was none of this quietly go into a room and quietly pray. They'd go for it. So where they got that bravery and courage from, who knows?
Well, I'd like this to be an encouragement to people when they're looking at this emerging generation. I think they're so underestimated. The expectations are so low. Whereas, one of the things that we say is they're looking for a challenge. They're looking for something to live for, something to die for. And I hope any that are listening who either have a heart for this generation or are that generation to take note and say they can stand. It is possible that by the power of the Holy Spirit they can stand even when there's opposition from home. And
what a great example your brother and sister are, two young people listening to this.
Yes.
They can do it. We can do this.
I mean, now my brother's 50, my sister's 51. So this is all 30. Years. So it is an important thing to find the courage of your conviction and know there's a price to pay. But it will, in the end, result in a deep-rooted faith.
So do you want to carry on your story? I don't know where we jumped in, but at some point, and lead us on a bit. We don't, you had this church, the numbers dropped, and etc., etc. So can we roll on from there?
Yeah. So when I got saved, I was really convicted to say, should I go into the ministry? So I went to see one of the church leaders to say, should I, what type of job should I do? Should I go to Bible college? And he said to me, no, you don't go to Bible college. That's probably the worst thing that you could do. And I suppose that was good advice to me at that time. And so I prayed for a job. I said, Lord, I just want to be serving in the church as often as I can, but also I need to be earning money because I've got to support my family, because by then we'd sold the shop. And so I got a job with Birmingham City Council's Economic Development Department. And it was a community development officer. And that was interesting to me because it meant that I was going out into community groups and giving them funding, helping them support their projects that they wanted to do. And lo and behold, most of the projects were Muslim, Islamic, there were mosques and temples that I was going into. So I go back to my pastor and say, this can't be right. How is it that God is sending me into temples and mosques to give them money, and I've just got saved? Surely he should be sending me to churches. And he said, no, this is your opportunity to go and, witness to them. And so next bit of good advice. So I really enjoyed those next I worked for the local authority for 11 years. Doing economic development, and there was two things that stand out for. So one, it got me into places where I wouldn't normally be able to go, and it was enabled me to witness to the leaders, because with only the leaders that you'd meet, because they treated you so well because they wanted the money from the council. So I built good relationships. I've witnessed in most of the churches and most of the mosques and temples, at that time. Saw God doing supernatural things in there. So that was really exciting. Few people got saved, but lots of people to experience the power of the presence of God. So that was good. And the second thing I really learned is that the city was really dependent on the car industry, Birmingham, at that time. And it was becoming a really rundown city. And because all the supply chain jobs were all to do with the car industry. And so what had happened is that I set up the first black workers group. And so Birmingham local authority is the largest local authority in Europe, because all the London boroughs are all small, but Birmingham is a really big local authority. So, and there were very few black and ethnic minority people in positions of authority and power. So I set up something called the Black Workers Group. And as a result of that, that was a whole story in itself. But as a result of that, they then invited me into all the big strategic conversations that were happening in the city. So although I had a manager level job, I was involved right at the top end because they thought I was representing the views of all the black people that worked in this organisation that employed literally, I think, 30 or 40,000 people, if you include all the teachers and whatever. And so we made this decision to diversify, and I prayed and I felt the Lord. And so we made a decision as a city to diversify the economic base. So we created these quarters, a jewellery quarter, a gun quarter, a conference quarter, etc. And that one decision radically transformed the city. And what the Lord was showing me there was that one decision can change whole nations. You can change whole cities. You can change from individuals all the way through to cities, nations. That there's one single decision can transform whole landscapes. And so I watched Birmingham as a city transform into one of the best cities in Europe, from being one of the most run-down ones, just by one single decision to diversify the economic base. So that was good.
Ravi, can you just unpack that statement, diversify the economic base? Can you just unpack that statement? Because to understand that, we need to understand the impact.
So to get to a place where you're never dependent, where you put all your eggs in one basket, and the city had put all its eggs in the basket of the car industry, because it was such a powerful way of giving all the supply chain jobs. Someone's got to make the steering wheel, someone's got to make the tires, and so all these other jobs were supporting this big industry, and that industry moved across to Asia, where they could do those jobs cheaper. So then we thought, can't put all our eggs in one basket. Now let's create lots of different streams of where income can come into the city. So we went back, and it's quite interesting. We went back into the history of Birmingham. So we've got a history of making guns. So we created a gun quarter. We had a history of making jewelry. So we created a jewelry quarter. So we had a history of minority groups, like the Chinese community. So we created a Chinese quarter. And so then we built some, 5-star hotel, and we created a convention quarter, the ICC, and those big, all became out of that one strategy to diversify the ways that we could bring money into the city.
Thank you.
Wow.
So I learned how to do macro. I learned how that God, through one piece of, so it's a wisdom thing really, that through God's wisdom, when we go into cities, we should think about what's God saying about that city. We should look at its history and what's really embedded in the ground there that God's left as a deposit, and how do you unlock that deposit? So when I'm working with businesses, so then when I work with a business or a charity or a Christian organization, I look to see what's embedded in their DNA. What's God's original intention for this human being? What's God's original intention for this business? What's God's original intention for this city? And I learned that the pattern is pretty much the same. You go back to purpose, or God's blueprint and expectations, and then you align everything back to what God had always intended. And that's how we see multiplication, of his will being established.
Well, that's really interesting, because we can look back quite easily to the foundations of our ministry. I mean, we didn't start it kind of evolved, but we had very, very, very clear mandate and a very, very clear, simple vision statement, which is, we know where we're going, and we know what the DNA of that is. And I think, but when you've got ministry, when you've got business, when you've got government, etc., they don't have that clarity of vision. I mean, in ministry, you're used to what we can say, what our vision statement is, that's it, and people will know what we're about, which incidentally is reconnecting the generations and preparing them literally for such a time as this. So that's it. But when you're working, like you say, with governments and businesses, they don't have that. Well, some ministries don't either, but that's another issue.
Well, so what I do? Sorry, Andrew.
Oh no, I was just going to say, well, and in the day and age we live in now,
yeah,
for a lot of people to think we need to return to the way things were is not seen as a very positive thing. We need to know we're moving forward. We're going this way.
Don't even go there.
So anyway, and just to throw that in there when you're dealing with some of these things.
So how do you do that with businesses?
I use a frame. So Andrew will be familiar with this, because I believe I draw a line, and I think call things above the line and below the line. And above the line are all those things which are invisible and eternal. So say to a business, secular or Christian, there's this line I'm going to draw. Everything that you can't see, so it's invisible, but is eternal, that's going to last forever, we're going to call that above the line. And everything that you can touch and feel is below the line. So and like Paul says, things which are invisible are greater than the things which are visible. So, and then I call those things above the line things like hope and faith and trust. So we can't see them, but we know they're tangible, but they're invisible, and they last forever. When we're all dead, love will still be here, faith will still be here, trust will still be here, integrity will still be here. But these are invisible things which are above the line. But below the line are the things we can touch and feel and have a temporary, period, like a business or or whatever. So when I'm talking to people, I draw this line and say, right, what do you understand? Is there anything that you understand about your business which is eternal, which is going to last forever, which is really important, but which is invisible to you? And slowly, I start getting them to think about the unseen realm. So say I'm in a business meeting and a business is about to go bankrupt. I'm sitting with the board of directors and I'll say to them, okay, let's think about now, the big thing that's missing here is that you have no more hope for this business. So let's introduce an invisible component called hope into this environment and see what happens. So what if we now had hope? What if hope was a tangible but invisible thing that we introduced into this meeting? What could we possibly hope for? And suddenly the spiritual climate changes in that room. Or if I'm doing marriage counseling and I say to them, okay, you don't feel love towards one another, you're in a dark place. What if we introduced this invisible, intangible thing called love into the room? Let's see this invisible thing appear into the landscape, and let's just see what would happen if love now entered in. So this is now introducing the unseen, supernatural, invisible things which everyone acknowledges exist, but no one can make tangible. And so I can teach people how to make those invisible things become tangible in the very presence in the room that they're in. Now that can happen whether it's a business or, so what's missing of the intangible realm? Let's bring that in and see if that changes the atmosphere. And once you change the atmosphere, then you've got hope, or you've got faith, or you've got trust, or you've got, righteousness, or you've got integrity, or you've got the word, or you've got truth. Once these dynamics, these invisible dynamics start becoming important to people, so I did this worked with a housing association called Midland Heart. When I first joined them, there was 4,000 homes that we had. And just by using this intangible thing called, I called it values, because that was a word that secular world that people would understand. We grew in 10 years to having 33,000 homes. We looked after 80,000 of the poorest families in Birmingham. And we made sure that they had good lives. Why? Because we said there's this invisible things called values that we're now going to, and we call them the golden thread. Now we're all going to do everything according to the values and the original. So that housing association was set up by 2 Christian people who sold their homes, bought one big one, and invited people off the streets to go and live there. So I brought them back to their original purpose. Then we invested in saying, what do we really believe are these invisible things that can make this organisation grow? Suddenly we're £1 billion, got £1 billion of assets, a few £100 million of turnover, because we're now aligned to the invisible things as well as the invisible, as well as So at Margaret Hanger, that's what we've done, Andrew, isn't it? We talk about above the line and below the line. So every time we pray, we have a time of prayer above the line, and then we have a prayer below the line. What are the invisible things we need to unlock that are important, and what are the visible, practical things that we need to do?
Yeah. We need to do that with G2G sometime. Come on, you've sat and done it. You can lead us out in doing that, because we operate out of that invisible line one way or another, don't we? I mean, we all operate out of values.
So exactly right.
Whether they're negative or whether they're positive, we offer and to recognise the ones that we need to align with is really important. I like that idea. Yeah, I'm really glad we did this podcast. I'm learning a lot, and it's really firing me up.
So use these different frames, like above the line, below the line. So, and I can use a language that people can easily understand, Christian and non-Christian.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you mentioned hope. One of the things that I find when people are discouraged, etc., people often say you should have faith for this or have faith for that, and you've lost your faith. And I think that is totally missing the whole point of it, because nobody would say to me, I'm going to destroy your faith or I remove your faith. What do they say? We take away your hope. There's no hope of this happening, no hope of this bill being paid, no hope of you getting better. It is hope that is pulled away. And the scripture says that faith is the evidence of things hoped for. So faith is only evidence of hope. It is not in itself something. And so when you take people back to where was it your hope was destroyed, and you can restore hope, the result is faith. So when you're focusing on that hope for businesses or wherever, automatically then faith rises.
Exactly right. So, but what we try and do is to say hope is not an emotional ascension to something.
No.
It's a tangible, living thing.
Yeah.
So it's like a substance that exists. It's just invisible. So it's like you have to bring hope into a situation. You don't stir it out of your own heart.
No.
So this is where ministry really struggles, because we can't make people have hope, because that just becomes presumption. So it's not how you feel. It's about having an intimate relationship with God and being able to understand that He is our hope, isn't He? Really, that is the word. Sure, it is hope, isn't it? So it's how do you have the tangible presence of God that brings that hope, and it being not just a stirred up emotion because we want it to be so. So it's not a fight of the will. In fact, it's a submission of the will that brings hope.
Yeah. Wow. We keep talking. There's so much, Ravi, in what you've said. I mean, there have been so many times I've just wanted to go. When you're talking discipleship, that is really strong in our heart. In fact, one of the books I've written is called Radical Discipleship. So that was a direction we could have gone in. I would love to have gone on the whole East versus West side. There's just so much in what you've said that, if you're willing, we sure would like to have you back again and track with this, because such richness in most of what you said. But I just want to check I've got this right. You said one decision can change a nation. One decision can change a family. One decision can change everything. And again, the challenge for me is, okay, what are the decisions I'm making that will impact families or nations positively or negatively?
Well, and taking it back to the beginning, the decisions that your grandparents made impacted your family and future generations.
Definitely.
In ways that we can't calculate. I mean, it's immeasurable, the impact that the decisions they made to get out of their situations, to flee, to get to England.
It's so important. When my granddad invited my dad to come, it was either going to be him or his brother, and they flicked a coin to see which one was going to come to the UK and which one was going to stay back in India so that the money could be sent to them to build the land. My dad won the thing, and he wanted to stay, so he didn't want to come to England. For him that was like losing the bet, losing the coin flick, because the idea was to stay back because that's where all the money was going to come back to build a farm. But because in a sense he lost that coin flick, he ended up coming to the UK. Now, who would have known that now everyone in India is trying to, migrant workers are trying to come here. At that time, the migrant workers were they would come, but only for a short period of time to work and then go back. So one decision like that. But I was even reading this morning, so even David has a victory against the Philistines, and he really wipes the floor clean with them. And then the next lot of Philistine battle is ready, and you'd think he'd just dive in because he's had this victory, but he didn't. He inquired of the Lord, and God said to him, not until the wind blows through the mulberry trees and I give you a sign, nothing, you're not going to go and do this battle. So this decision making is really important, that we inquire of the Lord even on the smallest things. And we've learned not to inquire of the Lord. We've just learned to go with our experience. So the little things matter a lot to the Lord, that we inquire of him, even when it's obvious. And this discipleship is really important. This idea of how do you even inquire of the Lord? What does that mean? And how can you be sure that you've heard? This is how we get to the right decisions.
Yeah. And for people listening, we've all gone through this crazy ride of a year, and even in this time, the decisions that you make can have a massive impact on the future, not just for you, for families, for your community, maybe even your country. And so I encourage people that are listening to think about these things that Ravi said, these helpful tips, things that he's learned along the way, and think about them for yourself and your current situation, and what are some decisions that you can make today to maybe change a course that you're going down at the minute. Are you going to say something?
No.
Oh, you took a breath like you were
Well, I'm taking a breath in agreement.
I was waiting for you to interject. Ravi, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Always a pleasure spending time with you. And thank you for sharing your story as well.
Thank you.
It's a powerful one. And I think there's a lot in here that people can really take and apply to their own lives. So thank you so much.
It's been a privilege. So lovely to meet you guys again. And look forward to seeing you in real life.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Bless you guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.